eternal unborn. You will come in due course to realize that your true glory lies where you cease to exist. Ramana Maharshi. You poor sad thing, thinking death is real all by itself. Ik Kyu. As for the death of the body, so-called physical death, it should be clear that a question or difficulty can only arise if there is identification as the body. Thus identified, you see bodies die. You assume that the discrete individual who has that body died with it, and you conclude that one day you, yourself, will die. The ego's sense of individual self tries to generate hope in an afterlife or a rebirth or some kind of second chance, but the evidence for these is sketchy at best, and so panic and dread set in because physical death sure looks pretty final. Most of the world's religions teach some form of immortality, but you don't believe them. If you did, you would not fear the annihilation of death. It has been said that fear of death is basic. Fear of death is a basic, primal fear that generates all other fear, and is the underlying psychological factor shaping all of life. All of this is an illusion, and all based on the essential misconception that you are an individual, inseparably associated with the body that apparently dies. What is unborn cannot die. You are the unborn. This is basic to the understanding. How can there be any concern over the apparent death of these body-mind organisms, these characters in the dream, when it is known that what I is, what the I is that animates all such organisms, is all that is, eternal, unbound, unborn? What is real does not die. What is unreal never lived. Once you know that death happens to the body and not to you, you just watch your body falling off like a discarded garment. The real you is timeless and beyond life and death. The body will survive as long as it is needed. It is not important that it should live long. Nisargadatta Maharaj. After the death of the body, I is the same timeless, unborn, impersonal presence which I is before the birth of the body. The identification as body-mind is a transient phase and does not affect what I is. But there is more to this. Even within the dream, even if there is identification as the body-mind you call yourself, still the fear of death is misguided and unnecessary. Our cultures have done us a disservice, created a boogeyman out of death that does not hold up to scrutiny. The Western medical model that death is failure, and as such must be denied, avoided, postponed as much as possible. This belief runs deep in our culture, but it is only conditioning, and it is not shared by many other cultures. Indeed, once again, a little reflection reveals it to be insane thinking. Once the body is born, its death is inevitable. Absolutely, certainly, a natural consequence of birth. In what reasonable way can it possibly be seen as failure, as something to be avoided? No one ever experiences their own death. No one ever will. By definition, it is not possible. The most widely accepted definition of physical death is brain death, flat line, no sensory perceptions, and no processing of perceptions, no thought, emotion, memory, no internal activity of any kind. Therefore, what we call no experience. Death is the ceasing of experience in that body-mind. Therefore, if there is no experiencing in that body-mind, there can be no experiencing of death in that body-mind. It's similar to falling asleep. In all the times you have fallen asleep during your life, you have never experienced it. You experience being drowsy, you experience lying down, getting sleepier. Next thing you know, you are waking up and postulating that at some point you must have fallen asleep. But you do not have a direct experience of that because the one who would have experienced falling asleep, had it been awake, had fallen asleep. So it is with death. There is perceiving and experiencing up until death. Then the experiencing stops and we say that the body-mind has died. Simple. Death is never experienced because experiencing stops. How can one possibly fear that which one will never experience? Certainly it is a possibility that there may be pain or suffering in the body-mind before death, before the experiencing ceases. And this may be feared, or at the very least not looked forward to. This is a natural response in the body-mind. So we can be clear. It is old age or sickness or a specific disease which may be feared, but death itself does not exist as something to be experienced. It is merely the word we give to the cessation of experiencing. Much fear of death arises from misinformation based on the segregation and active avoidance of death in our cultures. In fact, the body is well designed to die, and it is rare that physical death itself is accompanied by intense suffering. It does happen, yes, but most commonly pain or suffering comes before, during the sickness, and when the time for death arrives, the physical and mental functionings naturally draw back and shut down gradually. Death is usually much easier and gentler than the popular imagination holds. This is confirmed by those who work regularly with the dying. The bodily death, then, consciousness, no longer experiences the dream in or through that body-mind organism. The animating force of consciousness ceases functioning in that body, and so the body no longer appears animated, is no longer sentient, no longer is what we call alive, and it rapidly disintegrates, decays into its constituent elements. But there can be no direct experience of this because the experiencing has, by definition, ceased already. And consciousness, which is what I is, what you are, which is all that is, continues, is unborn, never dies, is eternal, was never limited to that body-mind in any case. So we return to the concept that the only true death is not the death of the body, but the death, the annihilation of the sense of individual self. It is this death, this annihilation of self, that the ego fears and is busy constructing morbid, gruesome fantasies about. It is this death that generates the fear of physical death, and it is this death that is actually worth investigating. There is an image frequently encountered in dreams, an open door, darkness beyond, stepping through, falling into empty space. The ego would have you wake up at this point in a sweat, fear of death making your heart pound. But this reaction is only a matter of conditioning of belief, a matter of identification as the body. In fact, the imagery is very appropriate. Nearly every spiritual tradition advocates stepping off the edge into void. The ego sense of individual self will necessarily interpret its own negation as void, that which is not, that where it cannot go. Please see that this next bit is very rational and quite simple, but transformative if truly understood. It is rare to find anyone to whom this concept has even occurred, let alone one who truly understands it. It is the secret of life and death, and the certain knowing inherent in awakening. If this, the world of things and ideas, is seen as what is real, as true, as reality, then that, which is completely and radically not this, for which there are no words or ideas within this, will necessarily be seen as no thing, as unreal, as void. Thus it may be feared, dreaded, denied. It is only when this so-called reality is completely understood to be dreamlike illusion that what is not this will at the same time be seen to be what is. Void, then, is not your enemy, but your true self. And it is the function of the non-existent false sense of individual self to hide this from you. The fear and avoidance is seen to be misplaced. In fact, it is now impossible. It disappears, and the heart turns from the illusion of this and opens to what is, knowing that its true glory lies where it ceases to exist. There is much to be said for dying now and not waiting until the body dies. Things might be a little rushed then, and one might find it hard to concentrate. Now, in the midst of what you take to be your life, there can be, if needed, a positive practice of building up and strengthening the sense of individual self until it is strong enough to undergo the negative process of realizing that it is a sham, unreal after all, never did exist. And then perhaps it can be let go, let die, let fall away. Then there can be a liberation from that ego that haunted and plagued us all our lives with fears of its own demise. For it turns out not to be anything real, nothing even to struggle against or try to defeat. The ego and the death it has convinced you is your greatest fear is only a tired tape recording in an empty room, which from outside you thought was a powerful and fearful enemy. But now the plug is pulled, and the voice slurs to a stop. This is what it is to die before you die, to step through the gateless gate into void, and to walk the universe alone. Magical world. The world is illusory. Brahman alone is real. Brahman is the world. Ramana Maharshi. The whole world in all 10 directions is a single bright jewel. What's it got to do with the understanding? Gensha. All is as it is. It's a magical world. It's all done with mirrors. If this dream has any rules, one seems to be that if you turn away from something, you will be facing it again. What you turn away from, what you turn toward, is yourself. Only the one who sees their true face without a mirror knows the self. Then the magic bubble is burst and all projection ceases, for there is but one without a second. There is no separation or distance because there is nothing to be separate or distant. That which is seeing through the eyes of a loved one, through the eyes of a stranger, the eyes of the mouse, the hawk, the brightest star, this stone, is that which is seeing through what you call your eyes. And on some level, all know this. This is the whisper, the haunting, the sensing, so often misunderstood, like a splinter in your mind. That which is seeing is all, and all is as it is. In his remarkable little book, Gifts of Unknown Things, biologist Lyle Watson mentions, among many other things, ocean squid. From a biologist's point of view, there are some odd facts about squid, which add up rather strangely if they add up at all. The squid has an eye which is astonishing to find in a mollusk such as itself, a fairly undeveloped and unsegmented invertebrate. The eye of the squid is extraordinarily developed. An iris, a lens that can focus at variable distances, and a retina with both rod and cone cells for seeing both contrast and color. The eye of the squid is every bit as developed as the human eye and has the ability to see as well. In spite of this, the animal to which this eye is attached does not have a brain with anything close to the capacity to process the visual information provided by the amazing eye. In fact, it doesn't really have a brain at all. Its nervous system has only very rudimentary nerve ganglia which serve the basic motor functions of the organism. No brain, no optic nerve center to form images from the vast information received by the complex eye. Also, there are literally billions of squid. They are highly mobile and are present throughout the oceans at every depth, every temperature gradient, in every ocean of the world, day and night. An eye capable of the best vision on the planet, attached to a highly mobile and ubiquitous but extremely simple and easily reproduced organism with a rudimentary nervous system, having hardly any optical processing ability. I read the book many years ago, but I still remember being absolutely floored by the implications of the one-liner which Watson concluded his discussion on the squid. Visitors are warned that this faculty is under constant closed-circuit surveillance. I wonder now if Watson knew how close he was. Seeing truly is not merely a change in the direction of seeing, but a change at its very center in which the seer himself disappears. Ramesh. It is clear that it is not the body-minds, not the organisms, human or squid, that are seeing. That which is seeing through the squid's eye is that which is seeing through what you call your eyes. That which is seeing is all. All is well. O dweller within, you are the light in the hearts of lotus. In every heart you are, and if but once only, the mind of the one who seeks will open to receive you. Truly that one is free forever. Shankara. So much worrying, so much anxiety, unrest, all the billions of body-mind organisms trying, longing, hoping, striving, struggling. Hardly one is free from that inner crying out, that quiet fear. Dukkha, suffering. It is the way of all the earth. If you read Silence of the Heart, the transcriptions of Robert Adams' talks, you will hear him saying over and over, all is well. His teacher, after the fact, as Ramesh was in this case, was Ramana Maharshi, who so frequently answered all manner of questions in the same way. All is well. Many times I say that understanding this teaching is not about comfort, not about helping the ego feel safe and comfortable. Self-realization is annihilation, pure and simple. The truth is that you are not. There can be no question of the you being comforted, and that is true. This is not about comfort, but about truth. If truth is to be known, the individual self is not to be comforted, but totally lost, annihilated, dissolved. There is no other way. There is no way to wake up while staying comfortably asleep. Comforting, stabilizing, strengthening the sense of individual self can only lead to prolonging the suffering. The sense of individual self looking for comfort must always be frustrated, always come up empty, for it is not. And yet, if only once, only for a moment, there could be letting go, if there could be that pop of the shift in focus, and the individual self seen beyond, seen for what it is, an echo, a rainbow, a phantom, and a dream, then there is something. Then the individual self is gone and needs no comforting. The individual self was simply a thought, an idea, a false imagination that cried out for comforting when the true nature of things is seen, apperceived. Then there comes something far beyond comfort, though there is nothing any longer that needs it. It is seen that what one is all that is, and that is the constant outpouring of love beyond love, beauty beyond beauty, compassion, bliss, gratitude, glory, wonder, perfection, streaming, outpouring, beyond comprehension. All that is described as Satchitananda, not a being, but being itself, existence itself, not a thing existing. This is pure awareness, pure consciousness. Being which is consciousness is absolute, perfect, knows no bounds, and spills out in itself, uncontained, is always everything, everywhere. The spilling out, this outpouring of being consciousness as itself is all of this universe, planet, worlds of senses and ideas, worlds of things and non-things, these bodies, these minds, these trees, roads, houses, squirrels, insects, telephones, everything, everywhere, is not as it appears, as some solid, separate, material stuff. The physicist will tell you this. Look closely enough and see this body or this table are not solid substance, but are composed of molecules, then atoms, then subatomic particles, which themselves are not particles at all, but moments of energy. I am telling you that this energy, which everything is what you are, is consciousness, being, outpouring itself in itself. This is what is called Ananda, because the very nature of consciousness, outpouring in itself, is perfect love, beauty, completion, bliss. This streaming is what is perceived as all this crazy world, including the body-mind you think is you. But in truth, when seen as it is, this is not you. This car is not a car. These groceries are not groceries. These are all pure love-light consciousness, bliss, streaming, here. This is obvious. It is seen here always. Once seen, it cannot not be seen. It is inexpressible. There is no way I can communicate this without sounding like a blathering nutcase or like the Dr. Bronner's bottle. But it is true. All is well. All is incredibly well. Everyone is asleep and does not see it. And so they lead lives of quiet desperation, lives of anxiety and fear. But those few who are awake and see it witness life being lived in constant, total amazement. And since everything is literally made out of pure love beyond love, streaming, since this pure love beyond love is the stuff out of which is made everything that we perceive as creation, how then can anything, the smallest thing, not be well? Everything, the smallest thing is God, is self, is your true nature, and the true nature of all that is, pure awareness, pure love, outpouring as itself. The human race truly has no idea what love is. I cannot give comfort to the individual self that seeks it. Perhaps in some limited way others can, telling stories here in the dream that bring some fictitious comfort to these fictitious selves. But when there can be total letting go of that idea of being a separate self, then what is seen is the love, compassion, bliss that you are, and that the slightest thing is. If nothing else, trust me on this. There is no way anything at all cannot be well. All is perfection, pure bliss, love outpouring. Any perceptions to the contrary are simply not true. All is well, totally. Svaha. A parable. Wake up. Mind and Maya are one. Maya fuses with the mind. The three worlds are plunged into delusions. To whom can I explain this? Kabir. As this book was being prepared for printing, some unusual news found its way to this small corner of the universe. The winter had been spent deeply immersed in caring for both of my aging parents and sequestered at the computer working out a final manuscript, so I was a little out of the loop. And besides, even in this digital age of internet and email, the snow-covered hills of Vermont are not exactly at the center of the world of Advaita. So some months had passed before an old-fashioned telephone call brought news to this rural outpost. What follows is a parable. Listen well. Some months after my last visit with Ramesh, it seems that there was a somewhat similar situation in which many seekers were exposed to their beloved teacher's strange behavior and departure from the teaching of pure non-duality. At an international seminar held on India's west coast, this beloved teacher apparently exhibited erratic behavior and inconsistent teaching not unlike what I had observed in my teacher months earlier. According to most accounts, the 150 or so ardent spiritual seekers and long-time devotees in attendance were surprised at the uncharacteristically defensive and argumentative way in which the teacher treated questions, often answering with mundane non sequiturs and irrelevancies. His comments impugning the moral standing of his own guru as well as other masters, his clear departure from the pure, non-dual teachings of the perennial wisdom, and assertions that only his teaching was correct and all others that had come before were false. By all accounts, the gathering erupted in confusion, recriminations, accusations, and general chaos. In the midst of this, something even stranger emerged. Allegations of sexual misconduct were made against the beloved teacher, allegations which he first denied outright, then admitted to, and briefly apologized for, only to immediately dismiss as irrelevant and unimportant. Needless to say, devoted followers of the Guru, widely regarded as the world's greatest living sage, were devastated. Life is messy, isn't it? Who the hell's dream is this anyway? Things never quite work out the way they are supposed to. You can just hear the disillusion, hopes and dreams and projections crumbling all around you. The flameouts and meltdowns by famous and dearly loved gurus are not uncommon, of course. Occupational hazard, it would appear. The stresses set up, the expectations and projections on both sides are immense and inherently unstable. Let me be clear. I do not know all the details of what happened. I do not know who else was involved or why or what the explanations were. Frankly, I'm not interested. There is no interest in condemning the teacher or excusing him, nor in condemning or excusing his accusers. From this perspective, there is no reason to defend him or to join the chorus of voices disparaging him. There is nothing at stake here, nothing happening. The drama of the dream unfolds. Who is it that cares what the dream characters are doing? There is so much pain and confusion around such an event that investigation is made difficult. The tendency in these circumstances is to project and exteriorize even more than usual, and this only exacerbates the pain and confusion. Moments such as these are moments of crisis. In the original meaning of the Greek word, a moment of decision, a turning point. There is an opportunity here, if one can but see it through the storm. There is an opportunity to see all that arises here, the disappointment, the anguish, the recriminations, the blaming, the demands for explanations or for amends, as the outward projections they are, and an invitation to turn and look within, where can be found both the root causes and their dissolution. On the part of the beloved teacher's handlers and promoters, of course, anger is understandable. If you have committed yourself in good faith to marketing something only to find that what you are promoting is not as represented, it would be natural to be pissed off and feel betrayed or double-crossed. It's bad for business, damn it. Somewhat more disheartening, though not surprising, is the speed with which ravingly loyal devotees made for the exit, hurling condemnations behind them, illustrates the truism that here, in duality, love and hate have much in common and are never far apart. Otherwise rational, but now terribly wounded devotees, former devotees, almost instantly began deconstructing their beloved teacher. All this calls into question whether he was ever enlightened, ever had the ultimate understanding. Really? Well, if he was never enlightened, what were you doing sitting listening to him all those years, getting all these deep spiritual insights? We were mistaken. Well, if you were mistaken then, could you be mistaken now? How would you know? Do you have even the slightest idea what it is that you are talking about? The ego is so alarmed at having been caught with its own pants down, so to speak, having sworn devotion and gone all gooey-eyed toward the great guru, who was supposed to make you one of the chosen few, but who turns out to be a dirty old man. Oops. And that it's backpedaling as fast as it can and making even less sense than usual. Rewriting history is the oldest form of spin control. A sad shaking of the head. I could never call him Bhagavan now. What are you, nuts? You are Bhagavan. The UPS driver is Bhagavan. Bill Clinton and George Bush are Bhagavan. The marauding raccoons pillaging my garden are Bhagavan. Madonna, Britney Spears, and J-Lo's grandmother are Bhagavan, for God's sake. Orange soda, cheese twists, and Oreos are all Bhagavan. How does one old geezer get an exemption? Very well. If one were to conjure up a comment on the relative stature of this particular beloved teacher, I know of no one among the leading luminaries of Advaita, other than understandably those who were his own disciples, who would have maintained even before this event that he was ever the uncompromising caliber of, for example, a Ramana Maharshi or Nisargadatta Maharaj. The beloved teacher himself would not maintain any such thing, and never did. He is a classic adherent to the Jnani tradition, an intelligent and adroit and relentless mind who says that he considers himself lucky never to have had spiritual or mystical experiences. In the Maharshi there was not only such a mind, but a heart that had been completely exploded, incinerated in the love beyond love that is all. And when what is understood by the mind is also known by the heart, when the mind and the heart are no longer two, this in-seeing in the heart-mind is deeper even than understanding. Look at their photographs. This is evident even there. The beloved teacher's eyes are piercing, penetrating, insistent. This is captivating, challenging, inspiring. Ramana's eyes are infinity, void, the total death of self in love. This is unspeakable. But awakened? Who can say? Who could say before this event, and who can say now? Before there is a rush to acclaim him undoubtedly the world's leading teacher alive today, who on earth is qualified to make such a judgment? After there is a rush to call him phony. Look within. If you thought him awakened before and have your doubts now, you must have the integrity to realize that apparently events can prove you wrong. And you are in no position now, nor were you then, to be the judge. How deeply the understanding of no self permeates in the case of any body-mind is, to use the beloved teacher's own terminology, between that one and God. What is the need to label anyone teacher? What is the need to label anyone fraud? Where is the expectation? Where is the disappointment? If you come to disagree with or dislike a guru, there can be staying or there can be leaving. Go somewhere else or not. What happens is what is in the flow of consciousness to happen. The flow of consciousness will take care of the guru as it will take care of you. What is to blame? Please see that this is not about that. Like everything in the manifestation, it is not as it appears. Well-meaning friends speak of this terrible scandal and ask, what are we to do now? Well, let's take it from the top. This has been said here many times, but here we are in the trenches. So once more into the breach. All there is presence, awareness. This pure presence, pure awareness, all that is, appears as this world of people and things and ideas. There are no separate persons or entities of any kind anywhere. All separation and distinction in separate individual persons or entities is part of the overall shared illusion under which that which thinks of itself as the human race labors. To whom can I explain this? You're making this all up. Literally, it's all projection of mind in consciousness. Telling stories. The whole house of cards being constantly propped up and reinforced by telling itself stories of separation. Like this one. Can you see? Stop. Go back. Wake up. Once this is understood, seen, and perceived, every problem or issue which has ever been known or ever will be known goes away, because all problems and issues are based on distinctions, on a belief in separation. Granted, the beloved teacher does not talk the way Maharaj talked, always uncompromisingly from the single point of the Absolute. The beloved teacher often and increasingly of late says things that certainly sound very dualistic. Can it be maintained that in the tradition of the crazy wisdom of gurus, all of these are said intentionally to steer seekers away from the trap of big dramatic thinking and back into their own hearts until they are ready to see it for themselves? Or is there perhaps some slippage in the beloved teacher body-mind? Is this slippage purely a matter of ego and lack of understanding, or is there a biological, physiological component involving his advanced stage. As long as it is viewed from the point of view of the dream characters who take themselves, and any teacher, beloved or otherwise, as individuals, one way or another there will seem to be a problem. But you see, so what? Here's the point. All of this is presence. All this is happening in that presence, that consciousness, through apparent body-mind organisms. And once there is not identification as one of these organisms, as this body-mind, then what happens in any one of these organisms is simply not significant. When you are disturbed by the beloved teacher, you are not seeing that you are the beloved teacher, or more accurately, what you are, the beloved teacher, is. It is inevitable that the whole variety and array of possible events and behaviors and thoughts and lives will happen, even though, as is also inevitable, there will be parts of this variety that you do not like. It is only ignorance, often quite self-righteous ignorance, which judges the infinite variety and finds some appropriate and some not. It is all the perfect unfolding of totality in consciousness. The so-called sage knows this and knows that the body and mind, which others would call him or her, is included in this understanding. This is nowhere near politically correct, but can you see that directing anger and venom and outrage at someone who you erroneously see as separate from yourself and set up as someone special on a pedestal, and who you then hold to a particular set of arbitrarily constructed rules which prevail in a particular culture at a particular time, only to then have them disillusion you, is absurd. Scenario 1. When the complete disidentification as a separate self, as an individual entity occurs, all there is awareness. No one aware. There may be witnessing a different approach to the teaching or whatever reasons taking shape in the mind. There may be witnessing inappropriate actions happening. There may or may not be witnessing some thought that these things may at some time have repercussions. There might be witnessing the general fear and reaction in the other apparent body minds when these things become known. Perhaps there is witnessing an attempt to minimize the chaos by trying to explain the insight that none of this is, that none of this matters. Or perhaps there is simply witnessing this impersonal witnessing itself being interpreted as denial, insensitivity, or cover-up. None of it matters. It is all the perfect unfolding. This stuff happens all the time. Why should it matter more if it is happening in this body-mind rather than in another? Scenario 2. What would bring a respected spiritual teacher to repudiate the spiritual teaching for which he was respected, to contradict in his own name the received teaching of which he was the custodian? If perhaps such a teacher's own awakening had consisted of an experience and an awareness somewhat less than the total annihilation of self. If, hypothetically, the total disidentification as a separate entity, which all the masters, including his own guru, spoke of, did not actually occur in his case, and if, nevertheless, his teacher had clearly said things to him that he had at least interpreted as saying that awakening had occurred, as life progressed, the ongoing experience of existing as a separate self would continue despite the awakening having been said to have occurred. Would this not set up a certain amount of stress in the body-mind system? On the one hand, there is the received teaching of the perennial wisdom that this awakening consists of the annihilation of any sense of a separate self. And at first there is passing this teaching on. But at the same time, there is a continued experience of actually living as a separate self. In good faith and with the best intentions, would not the received explanation of what awakening is need to undergo interpretation and modification? Scenario 3. What would it be like, even for a sage, to have an unstable student hear you say you are not this body and are the all, and have them finally lose their moorings and tip over the edge into psychotic megalomania? Would it perhaps lead you to tone down the teaching? To say and do things to actively steer these high-strung seekers away from this crazy-making stuff, trusting in consciousness that those who will find it nonetheless? Scenario 4. In any case, what part would advancing age and its effects on mind and body have in all of this? Or Scenario 5. Maybe the guy is a schmuck, a complete fraud from start to finish. Think about it. Would you know? How would you know? Is it important to know? Who is it that thinks it's important to know? Now finally we're getting somewhere. Our old friend, that sense of being a separate self, the so-called ego, that propped up hallucination, needs to continue to prop itself up. It's all done with mirrors. You gotta realize if there are issues about an ego out there, there are issues about an ego in here, regardless of whether or not you are right about the ego out there. What do you say? We let beloved teachers everywhere worry about beloved teachers. What is going on in the body-mind organism of this one? Is there remorse, regret? Is there arrogance, anger? Is there peace, bemusement? How can you know? What is happening is happening. What will happen will happen. If it is in the unfolding of totality for him to self-destruct, that will happen. If he is to emerge from this unscathed as a great teacher, that will happen. If he is to somehow muddle along more or less as before, events will bring that about. It's all taken care of. Secret retributions are always restoring the level when disturbed of the divine justice. It is impossible to tilt the beam. Settles forevermore the ponderous equator to its line, and man and mote and star and sun must range to it or be pulverized by the recoil. Ralph Waldo Emerson. The beloved teacher has not done anything to anyone. If there is making someone into a god and that it becomes evident that consciousness streams here through flawed instruments, well, there it is. Big surprise. Welcome to your own projections. The projections by which that false sense of self can continue to believe in itself. The issue of sexual misbehavior is highly charged. Many feel that this is most important, but from this perspective, that assumption must be investigated. I was recently reading that Mahatma Gandhi in his later years was known to regularly sleep with his barely pubescent early teenage nieces. Wow, the culture we live in would have some labels for that, no? Remember Nisargadatta Maharaja's answer to the question of whether the sage will always exhibit exemplary behavior. What are you talking about? Exemplary according to whom? According to what standard? And can such sayings be used to justify irresponsible behavior? Sure, The devil can cite scripture for his purpose, and even God is love can be so misused. Does that make it less true? Culture, moral norms vary widely according to time and place. This is hard for most to accept. We've all been trained, browbeaten, really, to absolutize the current norms as natural, God-given, or self-evident, when in fact they are totally relative. There may be room for tolerance on some kinds of behavior, but not on that, whatever that happens to be for you. This is not even open for discussion, either in society at large or among spiritual seekers. And the penalties for disagreeing are the most severe a society can mete out. Meanwhile, my friends the Shuar in the Amazon jungle have a highly sophisticated society, in many ways more enlightened than our own, which has functioned smoothly, joyfully, respectfully, healthily, for literally thousands of years. And it has done so on a set of sexual norms and mores and practices which would land any and all of them in a federal penitentiary and have them all branded as perverts and listed on the internet as sex offenders, if the good people of the United States of America had anything to say about it. What are you talking about? According to whom? At the risk of bringing down the great wrath of the politically and psychologically and spiritually correct crowd, let me say this. To the women who were involved, who have stated that their involvement was willing and not in any way coerced by the beloved teacher, to all those who may identify in some way with them, and also to those who were or are involved with the beloved teacher in a guru-devotee relationship, and who are disturbed by these events, I do not know who you are, and this is not meant to offend. It is meant in thoughtfulness and compassion. When the request or the suggestion was first made, why didn't you hightail it back to Sedona, or Chelsea, or Munich, or simply walk out, go somewhere else, find another guru? Wouldn't it be fairly clear at that point from your perspective as an identified body-mind person that something was amiss? If you don't feel it is appropriate now, how could it have been appropriate then? Stop. Investigate into this. If all this is so exploitative and manipulative and sordid, what are you doing in the middle of it? Instead of looking outwards, look within. That need for specialness is strong, is it not? Yes, of course, the guru-disciple relationship is an unequal one, and the guru carries great responsibility. Let the guru own his part. You get to look at your own part. Even if your part is 1/10 his part, if you focus on his part and avoid looking intently at your own, you will be forever crippled, the more so because you will always find many who will agree with you and support you in your woundedness. You can use that support to be right, to be forever a victim of a beloved teacher gone bad, and in so doing strengthen your identity and your sense of individual self. Or you can move toward discarding all of it and realizing who you are. What an amazing, once-in-a-lifetime invitation and opportunity to awaken. So it seems you've helped to publicly discredit an old man who, if truth be told, was doing a pretty good job of that himself even without your help. And shame yourselves. And what are you going to do now? May I make a suggestion? And I offer this both to those whose main concern is with the inappropriate sexual behavior of a teacher in such a position, and to those who are more disturbed by the corruption of the teaching. And of course, you can consider this as optional. It's not up to you anyway. Go back, back up. Whatever place you have come to in this, whether you blame someone else or blame yourself, whether you feel vindicated or feel used, disappointed or betrayed, back up. All of this is only facade. It is the world that has been pulled over your eyes to blind you from the truth. You think this is real as it gets. You, this life, these events. In truth, all this, all that you feel is real and important, is only a story, is only conditioned belief in the mind. Back up to what is prior to this. Go back. In this day and age, somebody tells you there is an enlightened master in India, and you can buy an air ticket and in a few hours be sitting on the carpet in front of him. The American dream machine has led you to believe that you can shortcut 1,000 lifetimes and just show up as close as you can to what you've heard is the top. By Indian guru standards, this beloved teacher is very westernized and very gentle and does not talk in radical terms at all. This makes him very beloved, but tends to disguise the simple fact that most who have shown up at his house were in way over their heads. I really don't want to hurt anyone's feelings here, but basically you've been to some seminars, maybe 20 years of seminars, with some lower-tier New Age wingdings in Santa Barbara, or the London or Amsterdam satsang scene, done some meditation retreats, visited some ashrams and had some initiations, and now you figure you're ready for the big time. But it's all dream stuff. Ramana Maharshi quite likely would have simply ignored you and your questions as he did many. Nisargadatta Maharaj would have unceremoniously thrown you out on your ear. The beloved teacher smiles and talks about feeling comfortable and peaceful in everyday living, and you feel great. And you go have chai with the other seekers and talk about it, and it's all very rewarding and you feel you're really getting somewhere. It doesn't make any difference. It's all projection. And none of this drama would have happened were you not completely and literally full of yourself. Suddenly, everybody has theories about whether beloved teacher is in over his head. That's beloved teacher's problem. Let him worry about that. Everybody is arguing the gurus should follow the behavioral norms of the culture they are in, even if for them it's all relative and unimportant. That's not your problem. Let the gurus worry about their problems. Find out what your problem is and work with that. Everyone who is concerned about these events has been given a gratuitous whack upside the head, and you're wasting it speculating about the beloved teacher. The beloved teacher is completely irrelevant. Your problem is that you're taking the dream that you are projecting as real, as something outside. Stop. Go back. This will not be fun, will not be thrilling, will not feel good, or stroke your identity as an advanced spiritual seeker, the way going to India and sitting with a beloved teacher did. Do the work you need to do. Find the help you need to find. What form this will take is not up to you. Nothing is. It will happen. If there is openness, if there is consent, if there is surrender. Instead of looking outwards, look within. Whatever is not present in deep sleep does not exist. Gurus and teachings and various behaviors are not there in deep sleep, nor are satsangs and seminars and books like this. What are you doing? Invite silence, stillness. Don't waste your time doing anything other than being silent, being still within. Anything which is yourself is illusion, not true, does not matter. And it is this that you project outward onto the blank screen without. Anything which is out there is illusion, not true, does not matter. Let yourself be emptied of these. Let there be emptiness. Let yourself be ripped open, hollowed out, gutted. Be aware that what form this will take is not up to you, and that it will take time. It may take a lifetime, may take more than a lifetime. It doesn't matter. Let yourself be brought to a place where it doesn't matter. In stillness, find yourself asking the dangerous question, the question that the ego does not want you to think of, the question that will end your life. Let yourself be brought to a place where it is no longer necessary to find someone to blame, either yourself or another, where that need for specialness no longer destroys you, where it is no longer necessary or possible to turn away from yourself and look outside of yourself to label what is wrong or right, where it is not possible to look outside yourself to see what is. Looking outside continues the dream. Only looking within, relentlessly deep within, past and prior to the superfluous levels, intellect and reason and emotion and feeling and psyche and subconscious, to what you are. Only this can lead to the awakening, which itself has nothing to do with either without or within. Wake up. Reality is what we take to be true. What we take to be true is what we believe. What we believe is based on our perceptions. What we perceive depends on what we look for. What we look for depends on what we think. What we think depends on what we perceive. And what we perceive determines what we believe. And what we believe determines what we take to be true. What we take to be true is our reality. David Bohm. Epilogue. An Eckhartian ontology. He who wants to understand my teaching of releasement must himself be perfectly released. Meister Eckhart. There is an unborn, unmade, uncreated. Were it not for this unborn, unmade, uncreated, there would be no release from the born, the made, the created. Buddha. Ken Wilber was once asked why it was that the East has had such a rich tradition of transcendent spirituality over the centuries, while one has to look much harder to find it in the Western traditions. How could a whole civilization miss the point for so long? Wilber responded, Imagine if, the very day the Buddha attained his enlightenment, he was taken out and hanged precisely because of that realization. And if any of his followers claimed to have the same realization, they were also hanged. Speaking for myself, I would find this somewhat of a disincentive. As soon as any spiritual practitioner began to get too close to the realization that one's own mind is intrinsically one with primordial spirit, then frighteningly severe repercussions usually followed. All the more amazing, then, that the teachings and writings of medieval European mystics such as Hildegard of Bingen, Mechthild of Mecklenburg, John of the Cross, and Teresa of Avila, Henry Suso, John Tauler, and the anonymous English author of The Cloud of Unknowing, among others, should have survived it all. Meister Eckhart, a German friar of the Order of Preachers of St. Dominic, lived and taught in the years 1260 to 1327. Just how he came to the understanding which he espoused or which espoused him has not been recorded. However, his writings and sermons speak of the same truth of radical non-duality that mystics and sages East and West have always pointed toward. Eckhart spoke of something he called releasement, an ultimate letting go which amounts to a total negation and annihilation of the individual self. This releasement opens into the breakthrough beyond God, which for all intents and purposes corresponds with what is referred to in other traditions as awakening, enlightenment, or the understanding. What he saw, he insisted, could not be understood unless and until this releasement and breakthrough occurred, when all would become obvious. What Eckhart taught, what his releasement is, a letting go into, is a unity which dramatically transcends medieval Christian belief. The human and the divine, he saw, are one, unique, unity without difference, because prior to distinction in substances, the acting of God and the becoming of man joined both God and man into one identical event. Being for Eckhart is presence, which is one universal. Western philosophers from Aristotle to Thomas Aquinas had seen separate beings as entities separate from the Creator. For Eckhart, this is not so. Being is God, and inasmuch as anything else, it is God having the identical being and the identical substance and nature. If God's nature is my nature, then the divine being is my being. Thus God is more intimately present to all creatures than the creature is to itself. There is a power in the mind, he said, which touches neither time nor flesh. It emanates from spirit and remains in spirit. Again, there is something in the mind of such a kind that if the mind were entirely thus, it would be uncreated. When I stood in the ground, the soil, the river, and the source of the Godhead, no one asked me where I was going and what I was doing. There was no one there to question me. But when I went out, all creatures cried out, God. Needless to say, this sort of talk got him into very serious trouble with the Inquisition in Rome, before whose tribunal he was required to defend himself against charges of heresy, charges which, as Wilbur alluded to, carried penalties of exquisitely medieval forms of torture and execution. But it is clear that Eckhart could not see what he saw, and could not speak of it, even though it is also clear that there was more than a little frustration that none of his listeners appeared able to understand. He sometimes called those who followed the external religious practices of his time ignorant asses, and when the Inquisition tribunal incorrectly paraphrased his teaching, he somewhat curtly replied that the statement as phrased was insane. At times, his sermons in the language of his day begin to sound remarkably like the sayings of Ramana Maharshi or Nisargadatta Maharaj. I beseech you for the love of God that you understand this truth if you can. But should you not understand it, do not worry yourselves because of it, for the truth I want to speak of is of such a kind that only a few good people will understand it. My essential being is above God insofar as we comprehend God as the principle of creatures. Indeed, in God's own being, where God is raised above all being and distinctions, I was myself, I willed myself, and I knew myself to create this man that I am. Therefore I am cause of myself, according to my being which is eternal, but not according to my becoming which is temporal. Therefore also I am unborn, and according to my unborn being, I can never die. According to my unborn being, I have always been, I am now, and shall eternally remain. In my eternal birth all things were born, and I was cause of myself as well as of all things. And if myself were not, God would not be either. That God is God, of this I am a cause. If I were not, God would not be God. There is, however, no need to understand this. In the breakthrough, I am above all created kind and am neither God nor creature. Rather, I am what I was and what I shall remain now and forever. For in this breakthrough it is bestowed upon me that I and God are one. There I am what I was, and I neither diminish nor grow. For there I am immovable cause that moves all things. Those who cannot understand this speech should not trouble their hearts about it, for as long as man does not equal this truth, he will not understand this speech. For this is an unhidden truth that has come immediately from the heart of God. In short, Eckhart knew, in a way beyond experience and concepts, that there was something beyond God, and that something is I. This he was compelled to express in concepts and in a manner that would allow him, barely, to escape being killed for his trouble. Thus, beingness is. Being lets beingness be. Beingness is presence, the experiencing of being. Being gives presence, lets presence, beingness be. Being lets beings be present and lets beingness be their presence. Rainer Schurman. Being is ising. Being is all that is. Thus, anything which is, inasmuch as it is being. Being is presence, capital P. Being has been called God, all that is, Satchitananda, being, consciousness, outpouring, perfect buoyant stillness. It can be asked what is prior to being, what lets being be. As it is prior to being, this what is not. Here is void, nothingness, no thingness. Prior to being, it lets being be. That in which being is, plenum, the fullness of no thingness, out of which, in which, as which being, and hence all beingness arises. The paths of mysticism, bhakti, and jnana join here and end here. All paths can lead this far and no further. Being and nothing are the last concepts and the last experiences available to us. From here there is only the open door, darkness beyond, stepping through, falling beyond emptiness. Prior to being and nothingness, which lets both being and nothingness be, is inexpressible, ineffable. Conceptually, the question can be asked, but here thought and concepts reach a wall, an abyss. The mind cannot make the leap to an answer, conceptually or experientially. However, it can be known, apperceived, in seen, in heard, in felt, in tasted. Does exist, cannot be expressed. Here words and ideas can only point in the general direction. Godhead, that from which God comes. Para-Brahman, that from which Brahman arises. But these words mean nothing, are only superlatives added to existing concepts. The words try to point not only beyond themselves, but beyond, beyond any ultimate that can be thought of, conceived by the human mind or heart. Yet it can be known, in a way beyond knowledge, in silence, in stillness, in the heart, in complete letting go, the breakthrough, the crushing flash which incinerates all sense of separation. Tat Tvam Asi. I am that. That is what I is. Outpouring in itself being and non-being, beingness and nothingness, what is and void, unborn, eternal. I. Our original nature is, in highest truth, devoid of any atom of objectivity. It is void, omnipresent, silent, pure. It is glorious and mysterious, peaceful joy, and that is all. Enter deeply into it by yourself, awakening. Huang Po. Reality's cloister, the circumscribing barrier no vision can detect, no thought penetrate in one glance, this beyond which nothing at a single point pierced by not this shatters into nothingness, dissolving the fabric, undoing the weaving of the veil. Can there be any identity when there is this knowing, immediate, irrevocable, I am not, nor anything else? Can there be any role for the ghost found standing in the mist of that dissolved veil? No seer, sage, no guru guide. Can there be any guiding on a journey such as this? A journey from here to here? A voyage neither begun nor ended? Along no path? A billion paths? No traveler? No returning? The only bodhisattva's vow, simply being this one all I am. No fear, no attachment, no intention or expectation, no separation, no connection, no identity, uncaring presence, being, stillness here, and so being be emptiness, an opening, forever seeing I amidst I, unseeing. All that is all.